mission today of Coinbase?
Yeah, our mission is to increase economic freedom in the world. And if for people who aren't familiar with that term, economic freedom is kind of an economics term like GDP, but it looks at the measures of different countries of the world, and it looks at factors like, are there property rights enforced? How stable is the currency? How easy is it to start a business? Is there corruption and bribery prevalent and things like that? And what's really cool about economic freedom is that it basically countries with higher economic freedom, like Singapore and the United States and Ireland, they tend to correlate with all kinds of things we want in society, not just better economic growth, but even higher self-reported happiness of citizens, better treatment of the environment, better income for the lowest 10% in society.
Gender equality, all that stuff.
Yeah, gender equality. And then, countries with low economic freedom, Cuba, North Korea, Sudan, these are some of the lowest. They tend to have, even things we don't want, like higher corruption, higher war, higher infant mortality. So it's basically, when I read the Bitcoin white paper back in 2010, I had this thought eventually that was like, maybe cryptocurrency is this unique moment in history, this unique technology that allows us to inject economic freedom into the countries all over the world, especially now that more and more people have a smartphone. And we can basically put good financial infrastructure, good property rights, global trade, a stable currency into 200 countries all over the world as one small group, relatively small group of people. And hopefully it has all these positive downstream impacts. So that's the mission of Coinbase.
When you look at the regulatory environment, it has been far from clear what's allowed here in the United States. In fact, you had a pretty strongly worded tweet storm back in September of 2021. Some really sketchy behavior coming out of the SEC recently, story time. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the SEC's approach to cryptocurrency versus securities. XRP comes to mind. And knowing your customer, you've obviously taken a very conservative approach to what tokens you put on the platform. And then you have competitors who are offshore, who it's kind of YOLO, anything goes. What is the current administration doing right, wrong, and what needs to happen here in the US for us to be competitive in crypto while still protecting citizens from, being bag holders?
Yeah, it's a big question. So, as a startup, you're always trying to thread the needle here. You don't want to wait too long for clarity because sometimes these things take 5-10 years. And so you'll just never launch a product. But if you're too aggressive, you can blow the place up. And so what we always did in the early days of Coinbase is we said, we want to go do what we think is going to be required in the future. Go get licenses, go do KYC, go do AML, anti-money laundering. And so we tried to basically do the right thing, go and talk to these regulators proactively. Now, the US has actually been pretty forward thinking on this. I'd say every year we get more and more clarity. So Coinbase is now a very regulated financial service business. I can go through the whole list. We have a license from the CFTC, a federal regulator. We acquired some broker-dealer licenses, which the SEC regulates. We have money transmission licenses. We're a bit licensed in New York, et cetera, and that's just in the United States. So we're in many, many countries around the world. So how do we get more clarity? Well, one thing I'll just say is it's actually better for there to be lack of clarity than to be clarity that is punitive or bad. So it's good that there's a little bit of lack of clarity as long as it's not curtailing the industry. But what would be even better is to have clarity that does provide that right balance of good consumer protection, make sure that there's a fair level playing field for all the players. And then it allows innovation to flourish. And so what's good now is that in the US, the Biden administration put out an executive order recently kind of asking all of the different agencies and departments to come back with a clear plan. And they did recognize the potential innovation in crypto in that executive order, which I was really pleasantly surprised to see. So what's happening now is that there was a little bit of jockeying, I think, there where the SEC said, hey, these all look like securities to us. And I don't think that's quite true. The CFTC regulates commodities, while some cryptos are going to be commodities. I think here's what I'm realizing is that crypto is going to be many different things. It's not just going to be one regulator doing it. So, think about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. That's pretty clearly a commodity, or Ethereum, right? Like many of these are commodities that probably should be regulated by the commodities regulator, the CFTC. Now, if people want to raise money for their company, a security token, that should be regulated as a security by the SEC. That'd be great to have more clarity on that. Let's have we would love to keep working with the SEC to make that a well-trodden path that any company can go raise money, and that's how it would get listed on an exchange like ours, and we could register as a broker-dealer or whatever license is needed. separately, there's also some cryptocurrencies that are going to be currencies, like stable coins, and maybe the Treasury should regulate those. And finally, there's going to be cryptocurrencies that are none of the above. They're artwork or something that probably shouldn't even be regulated. And so the US, with various financial, international bodies like G20 and FATF and all these IMF, are probably going to put some policy papers together. We're going to eventually end up with some kind of a test that says, is this cryptocurrency a commodity, a security, a currency, or something else like artwork? And then maybe 5 more things we haven't even thought of that it'll end up being in the future.
What would you make the test for? This is a utility token versus speculative security, because that seems to be the one that's really hard for people to figure out. If 99% of people are buying a token on Coinbase because they want to see it appreciate and they want to see it gain value, and only 1% are using it for the actual utility of it, is it then a security? Is it by the percentage of people who use it? How would you, as the leader in this industry, actually define it? What's your definition?
Yeah. So I think, look, I don't want to be presumptuous here. I think that we can put some policy papers together, but I don't want to be, it's the policymaker's job to come up with the policy. So I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But that being said, I think there's some existing case law out there, like, the Howey test is something from a long time ago. We could probably build upon that. So the Howey test kind of says, is this an investment in a common enterprise with an expectation of profit? And that would make it a security. So there's a lot of pieces to that. Is it an investment? Well, if you're just giving the tokens away, I guess people aren't investing, right? Is it a common enterprise? Well, maybe if it's decentralized and you don't actually control this entity, like you own, less than a majority share or something, maybe then that's not a security, right? Or if there's not an expectation of profit, people are using it for something. So every startup right now in the space has basically had to hire a bunch of expensive lawyers to go tease apart these old rules that some of them were created in like the 1930s, before the internet and everything, and try to understand where they're falling. And so I think building upon that Howey test, but it could be something that includes a commodities definition, a currency definition. I think we should, basically it's on us and the other crypto companies out there to go hire a really smart lawyer who has drafted legislation before and a bill, and actually get a draft of it out there. And then we can start to circulate it with various policymakers and get their feedback. And maybe they take it and run with it. Maybe they say, thanks, we've got it from here, but that's our next step.
Friedberg, Sacks, Chamath, would you go with the Howey test? Or do you have thoughts on how the government here in the US should say, this is a security, this is a utility token?
I think what the EO did was basically kind of give people enough regulatory safety in the sense that something reasonable will probably happen in the reasonable future so that people could keep building and iterating. My big takeaway in the last sort of like 9 months is that this thing is now too big to fail, and the government basically has to just find a reasonable framework to enable something, because the real big issue, Jason, would be if they did something crazy and now, retail would just get completely smoked, because I think they are the
What do you think is reasonable?
I think Congress has to basically pass a sensible set of legislations that clearly demarcate exactly what Brian said. This realm of stuff goes to the CFTC. This realm of stuff goes to the SEC. Now you guys go and implement. And if left to their own devices, those two will use these arcane laws and try to negotiate amongst each other who should be covering what, but they can't arbitrate that decision. And so as a result, nothing reasonable will happen. So I think that's what has to happen. Congress has to get together and write something reasonable.
Friedberg, you are building companies at the production board every year. You build a couple of companies. You have to go through securities law. You have to, raise money from accredited investors. You do it in the traditional way. But you must be looking at crypto saying, well, I could launch Kana, Munich, whatever project, and have a token associated with it and raise money and raise it globally or start a DAO. What do you think is a reasonable way for people like yourself who are playing by the existing rules to be able to embrace this new technology and these new platforms and paradigms?
I think
how should the government handle it?
Well, some perspective's important, which is, go back to kind of the 1920s in the United States, and there were pre-1920s, folks would go around and tell tall tales about interesting business ideas or business concepts or things that they were going to do if they got a bunch of money from investors. And investors gave them money, and they didn't actually deliver on what they said they were going to do, and they got swindled. And there was swindle story after swindle story that you can read about.